Alright, so this is a review video on chapter 4, 5, and the chapter of color. And in this study guide, the way it is designed is that it is about 60 questions. So most of the exam questions are going to come from the study guide. So if you find all the answers to this study guide and then have it right next to you when you take an exam. I mean, it is an open note exam, so there's nothing stopping you to do that, because I can't do that, unless I hire unless I go through like a really complicated process, but I'm not looking to do that. So I really strongly suggest that find all these answers and have it right next to you when you take the next exam, and you will make a good grade, guaranteed, because, like I said, most of the questions are going to come from this study guide. So enough of that, let's get started right away. So first question, which of the visual elements can be described as the path of moving point? So in chapter 4 in visual elements, we looked at how points can create a line through these principles. So a point in motion, so if you were playing around with this sparkling thingy on 4th of July, if you have your camera on a longer exposure, you can literally write the letter with that. So that is a good example of how a point, the sparkle, becomes a line. So the answer for this would be line. So I'm gonna write that down, line. And second is also talking about the lines. So what orientation of lines are the most dynamic and dramatic? So we looked at how different types of line can create different kind of the emotional response from the viewers. So naturally, more precarious it is, it packs more potential energy. So diagonal is most precarious form of the line. So answer to this would be diagonal, because it suggests the potential movement. At the same time, it has the most dramatic and strongest movement among horizontal and vertical. Vertical has, we'll say, vertical has a greater potential energy than the diagonal, but in diagonal line, it is more, the energy is more shown instead of just being static like this. And number 3, I just kind of gave you guys the answer because it's kind of a long answer. So lines are used to indicate the boundaries between forms, direction and motion, shadow and highlights, and spatial depth on the flat surfaces. So if you're thinking about like a linear perspective, you can achieve that with the lines and things like that. And number 4, what is the term that describes a specific spot to which one's attention is directed? So this has to do with the point, and also we talked about it. We use this term a lot throughout the entire semester. Is the focal point. So focal point is where it grabs the viewer's attention right away. So in this example right here, the focal point will be this tiny little moon because of its the isolation from this darker area, and then this small moon packs such a visual weight compared to all these elements below here. So that is acting as a focal point. So for this answer, it is going to be focal point. All right, 5. So back to here. 1.7a shows which orientation of the line. So that'll be diagonal. And 1.7b, which shows the which orientation of line. 1.7b is right over here. That will be horizontal. Next is this illustration exemplifies the quality of. So we talked about how our mind tends to connect things. So this will be implied lines. So the use of this kind of a principle can be shown in this example, where the artist just kind of connected all these subject matters and then created this kind of a curvature line to unfold his narrative within this work of art. And number 8 is also kind of a long one. So shape is often created through enclosing an area with a continuous line, surrounding an area with other shapes, and filling an area with solid color or texture, or filling an area with gradiated color or texture. So that's all the This is how you can create a shape with using the visual elements. And next is going to be, we're going to talk about light. So in this Caravaggio's masterpiece painting, the Conversion of St. Paul, Caravaggio is he uses light to create this really dramatic and heightened scene, and also not only to achieve this visual sensation, but also he uses light as a conceptual matter as well. So in here, the way the gesture and then the way this impossible lighting suggests that the divine presence. So if you pay attention during Sunday school, you know what is going on here. So Saul, which was the original name of Saint Paul, fell from the horse, and then he had an epiphany, and then all that kind of stuff. So in this scene right here, it is depicting the epiphany of Saint Paul, and that is thus the title being Conversion of Saint Paul. So for this would be light. And also we looked at how literally the actual light can be used to create this beautiful architecture of Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. So yeah, that's the Caravaggio right there. And blank refers to the relative lightness or darkness of a surface. So we talked about how value can be used to create a three-dimensionality and other things as well. So value refers to the relative lightness or darkness of the surface. And we also looked at how by placing same value, but it depends on the element that is in close proximity, we perceive it as a difference. So here, this gray square right here looks much darker than here because it's positioned next to the lighter element, and this is a really dramatic example of it. I mean, still, it's really hard to believe that this is one continuous shade of gray right here. So when you put it like this, you can really tell, you can really understand what is this talking about. So in painting and drawing, artists often use this technique of implementing value to describe the way shadow and light define the mass of forms. So for a particular term that I'm looking for with this question is an Italian term called chiaroscuro. So that is the technique that Leonardo da Vinci was the master of it. So by creating this really soft gradiating value, he introduces a really heightened and then emphasize the three-dimensionality in this kind of a dreamy kind of manner. All right, so next we're gonna look at color. So we looked at how color is something that we're very drawn to, and then there's, sometimes we buy an iPhone because we like this particular color and things like that. So we talked about how there's two type of color mixing method, and also there's like a whole color theory behind it. So color theory itself is like a semester long course, so we didn't go that in depth, but we talked about how there's like generally we categorize 7 hues of color. So number 12, in the additive process of color mixing, red light, green light, and the blue light combine to produce a white. So in displays or projectors that you see in the classrooms, that is how it works. So it has the bulb for the red light, bulb for the green light, and the bulb for the blue light, and then they just depends on the subject that is projecting. They change the intensity of those 3 bulbs to create this kind of to create this kind of imagery onto the projected surfaces. And our phones and our computer displays also work same way. So if you really if you really look close, I mean, not with the human eye, with like a micro, you'll be able to see each pixels with the green, red, green, and blue, and then combining those 3, you can create this kind of a white light. In subtractive color mixing, which is we are more familiar with, when you're mixing like a paint in a palette, this is what we deal with. So, and also this is how the inkjet printer that we use works. So this is called CMYK, and then this is called RGB. So the reason why this CMYK is called cyan, magenta, and CMY yellow, and then K stands for black. But if you mix those CMY, what you get is, instead of white, you can get black. So in this so in inkjet printing, usually what they use is the white paper, because by mixing subtractive color, you cannot create a white. So in subtractive color mixing method, the whitest white will be just the void and unprinted. There's a free space of free of ink. So when two primary colors are mixed, what kind of color is produced? So we talked about all these different terminology for the colors and everything. So that will be secondary color. So if we mix primary color, which is red, I didn't talk about primary color. Okay, so primary color will be red, yellow, blue. And by secondary colors are a mixture of two primary colors. So when what kind of color is produced, so that'll be secondary colors. So for instance, if you mix red and yellow, what you get is orange, and if you mix red and blue, what you get is violet, and things like that. So if you mix those two primary colors, what you get is a secondary color. Okay, so relative lightness or darkness of a hue described with this following. So we talked about the properties of color. So there's three properties of color, which is hue, value, and intensity. So it is talking about the relative lightness or darkness. So in last chapter we talked about this. So that'll be value, and when we look at the value, you can see when you convert this row black and white, what you get is different darkness of these gray blocks right here. And if you take a look at these two, even though they're in the same intensity of the color, because the difference of the hue creates difference of the value. So if you were to convert this image into black and white, you'll notice that this blue being much darker gray than this yellow line right here. So for this one, it will be value. And what are the primary colors? We talked about this. There is red, yellow, blue. What are the secondary colors? So that'll be the mixture of those two. So that'll be red, yellow, and that'll be orange, green, and violet. And also we talked about the color temperature as well. So I don't have that. Which set presents the warm colors? So warm colors is generally associated with like sunlight and fire and things like that. So that'll be colors that this side of the color wheel. Excuse me. And then cool colors, which were generally associated with like water and ice and snow and things like that. So that'll be from green to violet. So, and we also talked about the visual properties of these two type of the color temperature. So we talked about how warm colors tends to advance while cool colors recedes. So that'll be the answer. That'll be the answer for this question right here. And next, we also talked about how artists can use a specific color temperature to evoke a different kind of emotional response from the viewers. So we talked about how Pablo Picasso went through this period called Blue Period, where he was very depressed about death of his close friend, and then he exclusively painted his subject matter. Usually has to do with like a negative emotion like agony, isolations, and things like that in this shade of blue and green, which is cooler colors. So here Pablo Picasso is using this cool color temperature to imply certain emotion within this composition. So answer for this will be emotion. So this is same coming back to the what we just talked about. According to the value scale, is blue darker than yellow in value, and that will be true because if you were to turn this into black and white, convert this into black and white picture, what you will see is that the blue, this left column here will be much darker than this column of yellow right there. Okay, we talked about that. And here in this work by Henri Matisse, so Matisse used blank instead of blank to create this three-dimensionality to the subject. So unlike this, where he used this similar almost monochromatic color, meaning just one hue, which would be blue, Picasso introduced value to create the three-dimensionality to the subject. With the Picasso's work, Matisse's work, he used instead of value, he used different hue, and then the inherent value of different hue to create three-dimensionality of the subject. So what he did is, instead of making this orange darker to create a three-dimensionality, he used green, which is inherently darker in value, to create this kind of a shading. Right, so next we're gonna talk about color harmony and disharmony. So we talked about there's like all different types of color harmony that you can implement on your design, and then how artists can use this as a guideline to start creating their design. So there is a monochromatic, analogous, complementary, split complementary, triadic, and they're also using disharmony to create certain type of response from the viewers. So first thing that we're going to look at is this guy right here. So this work of art exemplifies use of blank color scheme. So if you take a look at this work of art, there's only one hue that we can see there, which is blue. So if you are just isolating your color scheme into one, it's just like this example right here, which is kind of a yellowish red orange color. What you get is monochromatic color scheme. So like I said, there's only blue green is used for this example right here. And next, when you instead of using just one right here, if you split it up to get a wider range of color, what you get is an analogous color, which is a little bit more interesting than the monochromatic, and also it kind of has that strength of a strong uniform feeling to it. So if you use analogous or monochromatic, what you can achieve is a strong unity within your composition, as you can see here and here and also here. But in analogous, even though that the feeling of unity is preserved, you can use it to create like a highlights and here and there, just to make things more playful and interesting. And next we're going to take a look at what if you choose two colors that is completely opposite of each other. So this color scheme is called complementary color scheme, and we looked at how Francis Bacon like to use this to create really disturbing, both visually and contextually disturbing imageries. So if it is used right, it can create really strong imagery, and the same time very unique and different feel, because a complementary color don't like to mix together. So what they do is oftentimes the artists use the mixture of these two colors as like a transition color. So if you take a look at this work, this brown right here is basically the mixture of these two, and then that is working as kind of a binder of these two opposite colors. So in this chapter, we talked about the different properties and strength of the different pairs of the complementary color. So there's three pairs of complementary color, as you can see in this. Well, there's not actually three, but we're gonna talk about the major three, which is going to be red, green, orange and blue, and yellow and violet. So each has the different strength. So violet and yellow, a complementary pair, it shows the widest value range. So meaning that if you turn this into your black and white, you'll see that the purple is going to be much darker gray if it is converted to black and white, and then yellow is much lighter gray. And blue and orange shows the not as much value difference, but white is, so this is warm color and cool color, so white is temperature difference. And red and green, it shows the most similar value if this was converted into the black and white picture. Alright, so next color scheme that we're gonna look at is similar to the complementary color, but you kind of use the two colors that is assigned to the either of the complements. So that is split complementary colors. So this has a little bit stronger feeling of unity within the if you use this color scheme compared to the complementary color, because it's not a direct opposite of one. So and also you can have a wider range of color scheme, which can make your composition a little bit more interesting and more fluid visually. So that is the Georgia O'Keeffe's case right here. And we looked at how disharmony, artists can use disharmony to create unique visual effect. So in Francis Bacon also used this kind of a disharmony here, and then this poster right here, how he used this kind of black and then and the letters and here and there to create this composition. And also we took a look at the Guerrilla Girls poster right here, just to make it stand out from all the posters in the New York City. So this is what clever use of the color disharmony to compose the design. Alright, so let's talk about space. So first question is, where is the vanishing point in Leonardo da Vinci's painting The Last Supper? So we talked about the vanishing point is where all the lines is converging to one, so that'll be right above the Jesus's head right there. So if you take a look at all these architectural lines, it is leading to right over here. And so that is how the one point perspective, the linear perspective works. And we also in the Raphael School of Athens, where is the vanishing point? So if you take a look at all this architectural lines and overall composition, you'll see that the vanishing point is somewhere right here, right above our two important figures right over here, Aristotle and the Plato, arguing over what is their philosophy and things like that. So we take a look at how the vanishing point is in the center right over here. And we also take a look at the horizontal line that cross-sects the vanishing point is called eye level or horizon level. So, and in one point perspective, all lines converge on a single point at eye level, which is called, like I said, that is will be vanishing point. So in one point perspective, vertical lines are always perpendicular to, so if you take a look at this example, you see all these vertical lines. Well, what are they perpendicular to? That will be horizon level or eye level, which is the line that crosses the horizontal line that crosses the vanishing point. And yeah, so let's get to the, so for instance, the horizon level will be somewhere right over here, and all the vertical line is perpendicular to it. And next, let's get to the principle of design. So first is going to be unity. So the sense of oneness of things belonging together and making up a coherent whole, that will be unity. And the visual unity is based on elements of shape, line, color, etc., while blank unity is based on ideas. So we talked about how conceptual unity is can be also used. And what are the four unifying forces? We talked about how grouping, repetition, and proximity and continuity are the four unifying forces. So what is the most apparent unifying element of this work? So in this work, that will be this the shapes of this repetition of shape, this umbrella shape, and here and there. You can just answer with the repetition of umbrellas. And what is the definition of Gestalt psychology? We talked about how humans understand visual information holistically before we examine separately. So we talked about that is why finding Waldo is very difficult because instead of we look at one element, our brain keeps forcing us to look at the entire picture instead of just small elements. Okay, so let's talk about the unifying force of grouping. So in 4.3.a, which type of grouping is used? So even though these are collection of different shapes, so unifying forces, there's a grouping, repetition, proximity, and continuity. So in this case, repetition is not shown here. Proximity, not that much. Continuity, there's no continuity here. So only thing left is grouping. So by assigning this darker shade, our mind automatically group these two. And then also it is grouped by top and bottom, which so that will be grouping by location. And here it'll be grouping by orientation, which is diagonal orientation. All the elements is position is this diagonally. And then the last will be grouping by shape, which is circle and this triangle and the squares. And also the different shades is also helping them to create a group. So the answers for this will be location, orientation, and shape. Okay. Let's talk about proximity. So where's that? Oh, excuse me. So by placing two objects in close blank, artists can achieve fusion of two independent elements. So if you take a look at example A, if you place these two independent elements close enough, it creates the sensation of fusion. Our mind kind of look it as a one element, so that would be close proximity. And the reason why this works is that closure is working to, so even though this is kind of a really pixelated one color palette, our mind can complete this artwork as a portrait, a face of someone. And another good example of using proximity to both visually and conceptually is this Michelangelo's creation of Adam. Notice how this close proximity, this shot right here, is such a strong visual and conceptual element of this work. The closure refers to the mind of inclination to connect a fragmented information to produce a completed form. And next, let's talk about balance. So in this chart, we talk about which box is most static. So when we talk about static and precarious, precarious generally has to do with dynamic, movement as well. So if an element share is more parallel to the horizon level or the orientation of the frame, it is more stable. So in this case, A is the most stable because this line is bigger, has the biggest side that is parallel to the frame orientation. Here is less stable because it has less line that is parallel to the frame. And here it gets a little bit worse because there's only one point right here, but it gets worse than this because now we literally only have just one tip, whereas this is more. Here even though there's one point, we don't see that this is this could be a side instead of a point, but here it is tipping on a tip on a point. So which box is the most static? Which would be A, or most dynamic will be D. Type of balance that the two sides that do not correspond to one another in size, shape, and placement. So that we talked about, there's a symmetrical balance and asymmetrical balance. So in this case will be asymmetrical balance. And a type of balance that the element correspond to one another in shape, size, and placement, mirror image, that will be symmetrical balance. So this is an example of symmetrical balance. All right, so Taj Mahal, if you take a look at this, I'm gonna make it a little bigger. Taj Mahal is built with blank to achieve its visually pleasing features. So we talked about how symmetrical balance is generally very visually pleasing because it's very stable. Our not just human mind, but the universe wants everything in equilibrium. It wants everything in stable status. So that is one of the reasons why human being, a creation existing in the universe, also attracted to this symmetrical balance, which is tends to be more stable, visually more stable than the asymmetrical balance. So Taj Mahal is created with symmetrical balance to achieve its visually pleasing features. And we looked at this kind of a scale, so which one is out of balance visually, of course. So we talked about how just placing bigger element closer to the fulcrum can create these visual elements, but also you can stack it up in multiples and then to create to balance it out. And we talked about how filled object is generally perceived as heavier visually, of course, than the open object like this circle right here. And D, it will be the out of balance, because we talked about how an element that has more information tends to be perceived heavier. So here it has all this texture, but it is a bigger and further from the fulcrum than this one, which is an open object. So this answer for this will be D right here, because if it has information inside of the shape, it perceives heavier, but in this case it's a bigger, and then it's not even close to that much close to the fulcrum. So the answer for that is D right here. Alright, so PM Mondrian's work shows a great example of blank balance. So here obviously this red is dominating entire composition, but still somehow it achieves the balance and then is very visually pleasing, so that will be asymmetrical balance. The blank gives prominence to part of the design, which directs viewers' attention to certain parts of composition. So in here we must be talking about emphasis. So 55. In this work, the word design is emphasized by its location. So it has magazine, and then the design is located in isolated, whereas this is in a sequence. So that's how the designer of this graphic is putting emphasis on the word design, and also he's using like this red and black letters, which tends to grab most attention. So the answer for this will be location. And this guy again, so in this work, emphasis is created through breaking the repetition, which amplifies the contrast. So we looked at how repetition of this shape creates a strong sense of unity in here, but just by placing this red umbrella right here is breaking the repetition, and thus is working as a attention grabbing focal point. So in contrast to all these white umbrellas, this is just one red umbrella, so that is why it amplifies the contrast and also works as focal point. Question here, we looked at this film. Oh, so I just want to go over the different type of emphasis. So there's emphasis by location, emphasis by placement. So just by putting this white void right here, right next to these really vibrant colors, we can kind of see this. Has such a strong emphasis. And it can be emphasis through contrast. We just looked at how this red umbrella has the strong contrast to these white umbrellas. And we looked at this film, how Steven Spielberg only showed this kid in the red coat, and thus creating this really strong emphasis, contrast, visually and also conceptually. So towards the end of the film, he sees this red coat again. So yeah, it's really strong use of the contrasting color. All right, so size in relation to a standard or normal size is scale. So this illustration is created by the explorer, I think it was a Dutch explorer, just to describe how tall the giraffe is. So that's why he used the measuring stick, which is human being right here. And yeah, because back then the people in Europe never seen the giraffe before. They didn't have a zoo or anything like that. So he had to create this kind of illustration just to tell people, you know, hey, there's a weird looking animal in Africa and it's really tall. So he used, which is the measuring stick, which is human figure, just to kind of show the scale of the animal here. So size in relationship between parts of a whole is called proportion. So we talked about, back to scale. So artists can use the scale to kind of create this really interesting work of art. So shuttlecock usually is not that big, but just by blowing it up is creating a whole new dialogue about this work of art. Let's back to the proportion. So in proportion, by creating this letter not a lot larger than other letters, the designer of this poster can create a strong emphasis on this word. So emphasis created on the word, not through a contrast in proportion. And the next principle of design that we looked at is rhythm. So here, which principle of design the work exemplifies the most? So that will be the rhythm. So we talked about how rhythm has to do with this repetition, at the same time this fluid movement to create this kind of a really visually pleasing effect when it's used correctly. Yeah, so that is it for this exam 2. So I hope this video was helpful. So if you missed a couple questions, you can always send me an email or just, you know, watch this video again. I feel like I went over a little too fast, but that's one of the reasons why, because I want you to do your own study as well. So alrighty, so if you have any questions, just let me know, and make sure to, you know, once again, make sure to take the exam as soon as possible and find all the answers, this study guide, and have it next to you when you take the exam. Alrighty, I'll see you guys on the next week's video.